todos, muito obrigada pela presença. Esse é um programa da Escola de Música e Artes Cênicas, Reitoria Digital da Universidade Federal de Goiás e a parceria da Mississippi State Universirity com apoio da Fundação para Ciência e Tecnologia de Portugal, Centro de Estudos de Sociologia e Estética Musical da Universidade Nova de Lisboa, Centro de Estudos Brasileiros, Rádio Universitária e Rádio Brasil Central FM. Fazem parte da equipe do programa Além de Mim, Maria Caroline Porto, Pablo Lisboa, Rosângela Yazbek Seba, Sérgio de Paiva e Wesley de Menezes. Nossa proposta é levar a todos os interessados assuntos relacionados à importância da arte e seu papel na sociedade. A entrevistadora de hoje será a doutora Rosângela Seba, chefe do Departamento de Piano da Escola de Música da Mississippi State University. Good afternoon. The Piano in its Perspective is a program of the School of Music and Performing Arts, Digital Department of the Federal University of Goiás and Mississippi State University, with support from the Foundation for Science and Technology of Portugal, Center for Studies in Sociology and Musical Aesthetics of the New University of Lisbon, Center for Brazilian Studies, Radio Universitária, and Radio Brasil Central FM. Besides me, Maria Caroline Porto, Pablo Lisboa, Rosângela Yazbek Seba, Sérgio de Paiva, and Wesley de Menezes are part of the program's team. Our proposal is to bring to all those interested issues related to the importance of music and its role in society. The interviewer today will be Dr. Rosângela Seba, head of the Piano Department, Mississippi State University. O nosso entrevistado de hoje é natural de Kenosha, Wisconsin. James Leniask é co-repetidor das óperas de Pittsburgh e Santa Fé desde 2006. Ele recebeu seu bacharelado e mestrado na Universidade de Indiana, onde estudou com os pianistas Menahem Pressler, Karen Shaw, Jeremy Denk e Evelyne Brancart. Ele também foi co-repetidor da Mississippi State University, da Indiana University Opera Theater e da Slippery Rock University, onde ele atualmente trabalha como co-repetidor vocal no Departamento de Música. Além disso, James Leniask trabalhou como pianista colaborador da Brevard Music Center, Glimmerglass Opera, Washington National Opera, Kennedy Center e da National Symphony. Ele foi pianista co-repetidor oficial do Metropolitan Opera National Concert Audition na última década e também fez sua estreia como regente da Ópera de Pittsburgh em 2017 com a ópera As One, da compositora Laura Kaminsky. E ele também regeu a ópera Glory Denied, do compositor Tom Cipullo. E será o regente da próxima produção da ópera The Rose Elf, do compositor David Hertzberg. Sejam muito bem-vindos, Rosângela Seba and James Leniask.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, James, for being here with us. It is a pleasure to have you and seeing you one more time. James was a colleague of mine at Mississippi State University. In fact, James was already there when I was hired. It's been a pleasure. And again, let me just read a couple of things in English for those who did not catch the bio in Portuguese. So James is native of Kenosha, Wisconsin, and he is the member of both Pittsburgh Opera and Santa Fe Opera since 2006. He has a bachelor's and a master's degree from Indiana University, where he studied with pianists such as Menahem Pressler, Karen Shaw, Jeremy Denk, and Evelyne Brancart. University credits include music staff work for Mississippi State University. He was our collaborative pianist. The Indiana University Opera Theater and Slippery Rock University, where he currently works as a mentor for their vocalists in their music department. In addition, he is a coach and staff of Brevard Music Center, Glimmerglass Opera, Washington National Opera, and the Kennedy Center, and the National Symphony. He has been an official pianist for the Metropolitan Opera National Concert auditions for the last decade, and also made his conducting debut in 2017 with the Pittsburgh Opera's productions of composer Laura Kaminsky As One, conducted Pittsburgh Opera's production of Tom Cipullo's Glory Denied, and will conduct Pittsburgh Opera production of The Rose Elf this coming season. Thank you so much, James, for being here with us. It's such a I can't stop smiling because you're such a dear friend, and I only have good memories of you.
Oh, well, that is mutual. I was so excited that you asked me to do this, and I'm so honored to be here. So honored.
You were very you were very supportive of me when I just moved to Mississippi State, and so I really appreciate that. But let's talk about music.
Awesome.
And I would like to know how you started learning the piano and how music started for you.
Oh my goodness. Well, I started actually older than most people, but maybe younger than many in terms of my exposure to music. Since I was a little kid, my first memories actually were involving music, especially like records and record playing. In fact, my parents used to always tease because when I was very, very small, I couldn't even walk yet, I would crawl and try to get the records to bring them back to my room and play them because I just loved music so much. Eventually, they had to go like on the top shelf. And when I got old enough, I would climb up and find those records. Specifically, there was a performer, a country western singer in America called Dolly Parton.
Yep.
I would say she was my first musical influence, which is absolutely hilarious because it's not classical at all. But she always knew how to tell a story. And I think she planted that sort of seed or that curiosity of communication for me. And then I would say that I danced with several instruments first. It was actually singing when I was very young. I was probably singing Dolly Parton songs in my little young age. And then in school, I fell in love with various instruments. I tried the French horn. My mother was very glad I did not continue the French horn because it was painful. But I then went to the string instruments. And then actually I was with my grandmother on my father's side. And she actually brought me in her basement. There was a plug-in organ, probably from the 1950s, 1960s. And she kind of showed me how I could play like one note and it would give like a C major chord of all the organ. And then the right hand, of course, you would do the melody. And she actually was responsible for giving me, I didn't know I was getting it at the time. That was my very first piano lesson. And I fell in love hard.
So your grandmother was the one that started, but then after that, did you have like a structured in piano lessons?
Yes. Immediately after that, I studied kind of by myself. I went straight to the library. I was like, oh my goodness, there must be books on how to learn. I didn't know how to learn, you know. But lucky enough, pretty early on in the end of elementary school, my music teacher caught on that I was falling in love with this instrument. And she connected me with my very first legitimate piano teacher, Sheila Weistort. And she would give me the sort of weekly lessons, the structure, that sort of balanced of ear training. The ear, I think, was quite strong because I had always loved music. So I had that natural curiosity. But she was the one who kind of gave me that structure, I would say, from middle school through high school. Mm-hmm. I moved from Wisconsin to Indiana in that early high school years. And sometimes, you know, you can easily think, oh, I was away from my friends. I'm sure as an adolescent, I was, you know, sad and going through the distance that moving sometimes provides. But what it did was it connected me to the keyboard even more. And in addition to that weekly structure and guidance, I also landed up in a high school that had a lot of sort of love and appreciation for the arts, but unfortunately had no great pianists in the high school. So I suddenly, believe it or not, even in high school, after only 2 or 3 years of lessons, I was already accompanying a lot. Mm-hmm. Because the choir teacher in my particular high school, who was actually a very talented man, he didn't play. His wife would occasionally come, but he noticed right away, oh my goodness, this guy plays, and I loved it. So, you know, so in some ways I learned probably by failing. I'm sure those first few rehearsals were horrible, but but I immediately was becoming an accompanist without knowing that there was this whole job associated with it. So early on, I had that sort of solo aspirations in terms of what I was learning and my curiosity, and mostly guidance from the teacher in that respect, in terms of how to guide my listening and my development as a pianist. And then on the other end, I had this high school with no piano players. So the choir, suddenly the band teacher was like, oh, we need a pianist for jazz band. Can you help us here and there? The orchestra teacher as well. Now, I couldn't be involved in all of those all the time. So choir was the main thing where I was basically accompanying and singing as well, but mostly accompanying. And then on the other end, working on the solo degree, all the time thinking I was going to be a doctor. So I did not have like parents who were necessarily great artists, but there was always music around. My parents had the record players. My grandparents, like I said, my grandmother did the piano a little bit. My other grandfather's mother played the accordion. So there were instruments around, but it was more like a folksy entertainment thing. No kind of notion of it being an actual profession until right around my senior year. I think I began to start thinking, oh my goodness, I love this. I can't imagine going to a school that didn't value music. So when I started to look for schooling, I really looked as a double major.
In pre-med, pre-medical
school? Sort of pre-medicine or pre-med or pre-med courses and piano performance at that point. I'm kind of at the age where accompanying degrees were not as sort of diverse as they are nowadays. So many accompanists in my generation and older, I think, became accompanists, but we have solo degrees. Yes. And we learned the sort of aspects of accompanying through universities, but through more through mentors than our piano teachers.
That's correct, and I can endorse that, because although I also have degrees in performance, I started as a collaborative pianist. So you were talking about collaboration and playing for choirs, and that's how it started. Do you think you also were able to do that because your sight reading skills were better? Sight reading is one of the things that sometimes scares pianists a lot. What do you think?
I think that part of the reason my sight reading became much better was because at quite a young age, as a pianist at least, I was put in a situation where I had to, as we say here in America, sink or swim. We just had to try. And I was exposed already at that young age to the deliberate study or technical work, and also on the other end, a lot of reading, a lot of music, a lot for at least a freshman. It wasn't quite yet like when you become an opera coach and you have like 400-page opera to learn. Yeah. That's later, but there was a lot more. And I think that sort of exposure, and I mean, dear Rose, I fell in love with the piano.
Yeah.
I did. I think I was searching, Yeah. And it is not surprising if you look backwards upon my life to the 3-year-old James or Jimmy or Jim who fell in love with Dolly Parton, that I ended up a pianist, but a pianist that works with singers.
Yes.
I think that was just my sort of circle,
One of the things that I always remember of you when you were here with us, you were here 2 years, right? So you were here 1 year before me, and then the year that my first year here, and then you went back to Indiana and got your master's degree, remember?
I do. I was blessed to be your colleague for 1 year, where I was staff accompanist in Mississippi, doing something completely different than I had done in Indiana. I played for a lot of vocalists in Mississippi, but I landed up playing at that point for a lot of tons of different instruments.
Yes.
I remember in particular learning, like, for the first time, all these Hindemith sonatas. I was like, oh my goodness, how am I ever going to finish this? And again, I think just little by little, you do your best, you know, and sometimes I tease as a musician, I feel like we're always disappointed in ourselves. We don't show ourselves enough grace because we have so much music and so little time to get it. But I feel like, you know, when I look back, I feel like I did an honest job, and I was able to ultimately communicate what needed to be done.
Well, you did an excellent job. What I was going to say is you were always very generous, because I've worked with pianists, and I have been accompanying people where you have to set up a time limit for performances in rehearsals. You can tell them, I will rehearse with you twice, maybe once. Or sometimes recite read on stage too. That has happened before. But you were always making time to accommodate everybody's schedule and making sure that everybody felt comfortable before the recital and during the recital. So those were things that not all collaborative pianists aim for, but you were very generous, and I remember that. I do. Now, let's go back to your Indiana. When you went back to your master's degree, you were under also studying with Menahem Pressler.
I was. I came back. I left Indiana rather abruptly because the position in Mississippi, and it came at an ideal time. I had done a lot in Indiana, but I needed also some emotional distance. Like, I finished my degree in that summer. I think I finished in August. And then I abruptly got this job offer through somebody who knew me in Indiana, who had been on the faculty of Mississippi State. You didn't get a pleasure to meet her, but Kelly was a close friend of mine. And she was doing a 1 year sort of visiting. And from her, I got this sort of interview. I guess the position must have suddenly opened up. I'm not sure, but... and then from the interview, I got lucky enough to do it. So in 2 weeks, I was gone. And then I decided, you know, during my second year, with consultations with you, with consultations, there was Jackie was there, and Leanne, Dr. Edwards and Leanne, were all able to collectively decide that eventually I wanted to get that master's degree, that was going to be important to me. And I thought, oh, I don't want to go back to the same place I've already been, but I thought I would audition. And luckily for me, a sort of position came open where I could do my master's for free. And I was on the coaching staff, kind of like visiting. It wasn't a lecturer position, but it was like a super AI, I call it, where I got a very nice salary. And I came back to study my master's again in solo. And when I interviewed with Menahem Pressler and his wife, and then found out I could study with him, I decided, well, okay, I'm going back to Indiana.
So and then you became the coach for the opera, right?
Yes. When I left Indiana, I thought that, you know, like I said, I emotionally needed that break, personally and professionally. I just needed to go somewhere else. And then when I came back to Indiana, I came running back because I was so excited. I knew I could develop the skills that I wanted to develop in those 2 years.
And then after that, James, you went to where did you go right after when you finished your master's degree?
I finished my master's degree and went towards the end of my master's degree, a position opened up for a residency at the Kennedy Center. At that time, it was affiliated. There was a sort of specific opera-specific program through the Washington National Opera, and Placido Domingo was the head, and he was a great opera singer for his time, and he had chosen to begin this sort of residency program where he took maybe 8 singers and 1 or 2 pianists. I think 2 pianists, 1 every year, so you were there for 2 years. And during that end of my master's degree, I just was encouraged to apply and went ahead, did it, and I ended up getting it. So I decided, well, instead of staying in Bloomington, there was an offer to stay. I thought, well, I will just see what happens so that I know what it's like in that sort of non-academic world. I had worked for academia and had really enjoyed my time in Mississippi. So I felt very enchanted and attracted to the idea that there would be constant learning in my environment. But I also decided that it would be nice to see what happened on the sort of exclusively professional side.
So tell us more about your daily routine, being coached by Plácido, or being under him, or being in a professional environment where you are ready and you are ready, or you are out in those kind of environments.
And Rose, you kind of hit the nail on the head, exactly, that it is a sort of environment where definitely if you were ready, you were promoted. I didn't really see many people who were fired, but, and as we know, just to be fully, to have full disclosure, there are varying degrees of ready, because there's never perfect. That's inhuman. And and there's always something redeemable, even if it's just a smile or something, so varying degrees. I always wanted to feel like the most prepared person in the room. And I would say during my first year, either I was quite prepared or I got lucky. Very, sort of perfect storm of events happened. That first year, there were sort of economic issues with the opera itself, and maybe with the country. I don't think as much with the country during that time, but definitely with the opera, a little bit with the country. There was a little bit of an economic downturn. So everything became more conservative. So they look and they think, how can we save money? This guy is doing a great job. Somebody else is going on maternity leave. I believe that was what happened. So they put me on the staff for 2 operas for the second year of my apprenticeship to save money.
Yeah.
But also, and then that coincidence, there was a coincidence during my second year where they did a sort of gala concert, again, to raise money, with Domingo in 3 one-act portions of different operas. Fedora, Otello, and Merry Widow, I think they were. And they all starred Plácido because he was the one that could bring in the tickets and get the seats. Well, lucky for me, Fedora, the act that they chose was, there was a feature role for a non-singing pianist named Lazinski. My last name is Leniask. So I think that maybe just the combination of being ready, and sort of being coincidentally Lazinski, Leniask, that somehow in his ear it caught on, and he asked me to do that role with him on stage, which landed up being a big vehicle for me, actually. If I can just talk a little bit more about that experience. It was not only rewarding with Domingo himself to get to do, I had my stage debut underneath in the pit in the magic flute playing. It wasn't the toy piano, but it was a celesta. But above stage, I actually got to play. There's 5 minutes. It's like a nocturne mini Chopin concerto. And it's a duet with Domingo and the soprano. So it was kind of amazing to land up in, probably there are maybe 2-3 operas in the standard repertoire that have piano at all on stage.
Mm-hmm.
But this one has 5 minutes, no orchestra, just solo piano. So it was an amazing opportunity. One that the head of music at the Santa Fe Opera happened to do 20 years prior to me with Plácido Domingo.
I see.
So I think when my resume again came across Bob Tweeton's sort of table, he recognized, or at least he pointed out to me, that was something that kind of endeared me to him immediately. Because, as we know, we are, as musicians, especially as collaborative musicians, we are always connecting.
Yes.
And I think that idea of connection is actually really how we build our sort of anchor our career. It wasn't the fact that I did it. I think it was the fact that there were just enough connections on my resume that we could always find something in common.
I think also what we have to be careful is being professional musicians. We make mistakes. We are human beings. I just performed this morning, and I made several mistakes.
On YouTube, you will find mistakes.
Yeah, exactly. And I just performed, and I had mistakes, and you just continue. But I think one of the things that we always have to be careful about is doing our best, being ready. Making mistake is different than not being prepared. There are two different things. And never burn bridges, because one opportunity that you had with Plácido led you to your future now job with Santa Fe Opera Company. So, but I would like for you to explain a little bit more, because one of the things that also it's confusing for a lot of people that are not musicians or are starting their career is that, oh, I want to be on stage with Plácido Domingos, René Fleming. I can do this, I can do that, and I am talented, and I'm going to go for it, which we are not encouraging that. But what is the routine of an opera coach? Yeah. And how do you guys decide? Let's start from the beginning. How do you start with selecting the opera? What are you going to do daily? What are you going to do also to promote or helping your colleagues? Or what is it expected from you?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. Some of which I have to say I have some control over. I have to say personally, my career goal was never to be like famous. So I think if you chose pianist or classical pianist and you wanted to be famous, maybe make another choice. But I have to say that in terms of being respected and sort of loved and admired by your colleagues as a communicator, as an artist, that to me was always sort of like one of my cornerstone goals. So in terms of the planning, I think it requires a lot of different things. I mean, my personality tends to lend itself very well to patience and to hard work. I've been working since I was 13, 14, so I'm not afraid to get my hands into the work. In terms of a practice schedule, as for me personally, I became more of a morning person as I got older, because I simply recognized that if I didn't get my practicing done before I started with singers, and luckily for me, singers, because I work mostly with singers these days, they don't get rolling until a little later in the day. So I can usually do my sort of work in the morning. If I want to do little things, I can do them during the day. But usually before 11, if I haven't done it, it's not going to happen that day. And then the working with singers. Now, in terms of planning and programming, that is way above my sort of pay grade or structure. So my 30s were spent learning repertoire that people would bring to me. Which is great and scary at the same time, because, I learned my first big Strauss opera before I felt I was really ready. But when you challenge yourself and it's coming, I was able to do it. And it worked out very well for me. Now, as I begin in my mid 40s, I'm doing more programming. Not necessarily the big productions, but I am doing programming here and there for the resident artists, or on a sort of mentorship level, we're always suggesting arias here and there for the individual singers to work to get them to their level. I personally feel like the 6 singers I get to work with here in Pittsburgh, and maybe the 35 or so in Santa Fe that are the sort of residents or apprentices, they're already professionals. Mm-hmm. By this point, they have already kind of matched that sort of sweet spot of they have something to offer, something to say, the voice is far enough advanced, their languages are far enough advanced. They're just looking to continue to build, or to find maybe what direction that they sort of fit in the opera world as it speaks to. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. But what I'm asking is, do you have to meet with them 3 hours a day, 4 hours, and you rotate the coaching, or is that every day 1 hour, or is that something that, how does that work?
We schedule kind of as a team. I've been lucky because half of my career now, 15 years here in Pittsburgh and Santa Fe, I work with a team of coaches, and we make sure that they're sort of appropriately rotated in and out. I do 1 hour coaching sessions. They've been getting individual sessions every day from one, if not two, of the three of us at this level. Mm-hmm. And so I work on my own craft, and then I help them to the best of my ability. And like you said earlier, before this interview, I don't have all the answers by any means, but I know that I can help them with certain things, and then they can take that knowledge between all of us and come up with their sort of package or their influence.
And when the decision is made about the opera, is this something that is as you said, above your pay grade, and they come and say, they meet with the group and say, we're going to do Puccini this time, and here is the book, James and two other collaborative pianists learn it. So you all have to be prepared to do anything from the opera?
Yes.
Or do you split the opera? Because we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of pages.
Certainly, yeah. And that was a very intimidating thing, to go from solo work where sometimes we would spend hours upon hours on maybe one phrase,
Mm-hmm.
Or etudes that we play like for our whole lives, and we have various degrees of mastery ultimately, but we spend a lot of time on very little. When you suddenly have to learn or be responsible for 300 to 400 pages, it can be very intimidating, and you have to find that sort of balance between knowing the repertoire well enough that you could play it at almost any time. Particularly in my position, the principal coach will know that he is going to play the operas, and he will focus on this specific opera. At our age, we kind of rotate now in and out. But initially, when I was just second pianist, it was actually harder because I wouldn't know when I would play in the opera. I would see first rehearsal when they run the opera, and then everything would change. And I would learn and try to stay up to the best of my ability. And sometime I would suddenly be put into rehearsal, and I would sit down and they'd say, oh, we're not doing what's on the schedule. We're running the second and third acts today. Okay. So you do have to be at the point where you can essentially make it, and you're still close enough in contact with what specific choices are being made. That was the sort of biggest thing for me to learn, getting from the place where I was an apprentice and everything was sort of protected. You knew exactly what you had and this and that, to suddenly I was doing 6 operas here and 2 operas in Santa Fe. So 8 times 300, 2,500 pages of music. It's a lot. Luckily, as you know, even with the repertoire, as you build the repertoire, a lot of it comes back like old friends.
Yeah.
Whenever time Madame Butterfly comes back, or when Nozze di Figaro comes back, I'm starting at a different level. Mm-hmm. Now the sort of journey is more about making a deeper understanding, and I'm old enough to say this, where we view the opera differently based on what is going on culturally, or views in society change, or society becomes more conservative or more liberal or more religious. Maybe you're going through a time of loss and things hit you differently. And so that's to me been the most interesting part, is as you continue to revisit these sort of old friends in different phases of your life, you see and are able to view so much different. I'm sure it's similar to like when you teach a course and then you revisit it the next time, you sink even deeper into it, or you have a totally different appreciation for what can be highlighted or whatnot.
Even the solo works that we play, we are never playing the same thing twice.
Exactly. I totally agree.
Let me ask you another thing too. You use orchestral reductions, right?
Yes. This is a very good question, actually.
You know where I'm going with that, right?
And this is an important difference. And this ties in also to that sort of like, we have 300 pages to learn. We are using orchestral reductions, often, particularly something like Rossini.
Wagner.
We have something that is not easy, but idiomatic is what we call it. It is easily or more easily playable on a violin.
Yeah.
And then suddenly we are playing repeated notes, or we're playing like repeated chords. I was playing Largo al factotum Rossini. If we played on our instrument exactly what was written, it would sound like Prokofiev. So we have to find this sort of balance of sounding like Rossini, light and fun, but yet giving the sort of essence of what the orchestral reduction is. And that I do mostly from listening and watching the full score and saying, okay, this is what I hear. This is the best flavor. And I try to emulate it on the piano. Sometimes the best option is not playing exactly what's on the piano. This happens a lot for me for Mozart operas. If I played from a full score on some of the Mozart operas, it would almost sound like Brahms.
Yes.
So you kind of find a way to make it sound like the best sort of reflection of the orchestration, plus the stylistic sensibilities of the composer. And that to me is a big difference. This idea of idiomatic approach, especially versus with the solo thing, that's when you can spend your 4 or 5 hours, making sure that all those repeated notes are coming out absolutely perfectly. For me, if you do all the repeated chords and I get them to perfection, I would have tendinitis and have 4 pages, and it would sound like Prokofiev. So I find a way to make it idiomatic for my instrument. Or if I'm tired that day, my idiomatic for me in that moment. If I've been playing a lot that day, my repeated notes don't, live the same way in my finger. So I change, so you're constantly shifting, but all the time keeping Rossini in mind. The spirit of it.
Yeah, the Queen of the Night, the aria, for example, has the repeated things. I never play as it is written. I always broke them, which is much easier to do this than the repeated notes. And again, it's still sounding like Mozart and still keeping up with the singer, especially those who are coloratura, and they can sing really fast.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And you have to remember that at the end of the day, any sort of rubato that we could consider acceptable as a classical pianist or as a soloist may not be what the singer wants, or may not be what the conductor wants, because when he gives you the downbeat, we better be with him. No matter how beautifully we play, we need to make sure we're also with them. Yeah.
Jim, in here I am reading some questions that we discussed a little bit before, but we are going off a little bit and coming back. Yeah, how do you balance? And that's the thing too, how do you balance your practice, your work, your personal life? And I bet you are invited many, many, many times to also perform outside your opera group. And so how do you balance all of this?
Well, luckily for me, I chose, I tease always that I play for work. I do love what I do. I'm very much in love with that. So sometimes, especially before the pandemic, I realized, my work-life balance was not so awesome. Now, as you get older and you find both of us, since we've since the time we knew each other, both of us now have a family. and both of us have found, spouses and have those sort of connections. So you do eventually find time for that. But you do have, I believe, you have to learn to literally, find that line. And to me, I call it stealing moments. Whenever I go off to Santa Fe, I make sure that I spend that time when I drive, that I visit my mother. Mm-hmm. Even if it's like, oh, we don't have enough time, or I go to Wisconsin and make sure I see those people, because, we all aren't going to be here forever. And,
yes.
So it's important for me at this age, as a 40-something-year-old, to do that. Now, professionally, the balance has shifted a lot, I would say. My sort of initial efforts, like I said, in the 30s were like terror, because, oh my God, I have to learn so many operas, So you were spending a lot more time sort of on the practicing side. I still practice quite a bit, but now somehow maybe around 40. It's of course approximate, and it differs every year. Now when I look at the repertoire that I'm going to be playing, I'm not nearly as intimidated, because I played Carmen 5 times. I played Zauberflöte 5 or 6 times at the Kennedy Center, so you begin to find ways that you can expand and contract in terms of your professional output versus your personal. And then professionally, I'm always usually up for trying something new. My thing with my 40s was I went to my boss, and just at one time I felt very brave, and I thought, oh, I would love to conduct a chorus rehearsal sometime, or conduct maybe one opera rehearsal. If I knew that my colleague Glenn was conducting, who is also a pianist, could I conduct sometime? So I mentioned this to him. 2 weeks later, my colleague Glenn got a conducting job somewhere else. And suddenly my very first conducting job was a whole opera. But luckily they knew that I had been watching conductors. They saw me conduct a little bit here and there. So sometimes I think just the balance in terms of what I've done has been more sort of maybe imbalanced in reality, but curiosity based in terms of the trajectory of my career. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't say that I live the most balanced life. I definitely do work 6 days a week, often 7 if I include I'll say, just this 1 hour I'll work. Mm-hmm. So that's not necessarily a balance thing. Luckily, it usually feeds me. And luckily for me, I also have sort of like a substantial time off in December, January. I have a substantial time off in May. If I ever decided that I wanted those 3 months in the summer, I could do that.
And let's talk about, so in the summer you are at Santa Fe, right?
Yeah.
The whole summer, which is June, July, and part of August, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And then you are in Pittsburgh. I would like for you to talk about the programs that you are right now pretty much in charge in Pittsburgh, the purpose of the Pittsburgh Opera and what you guys do and how many productions you have. Great. As well as the Santa Fe Opera, because it's a mecca for singers. Santa Fe has become a goal for a lot of singers to go there and be one of them. So let's talk about Pittsburgh first, and then you talk about Santa Fe.
Yeah, sure. So Pittsburgh Opera, where I have landed up now since 2006, has I would say has a strong reputation as a regional opera company. So it has a sort of financial security. We have the luxury of a very big theater called the Menahem Center, which seats maybe 2,600 seats. So we can do, when we rent downtown, we do these bigger productions, like our Carmen will be there, our Zauberflöte, probably not at full capacity thanks to Delta variant. We all know the world we're living in now, and we can discuss that in a bit if you wish. But we have that access. And then my second year here, we were able to purchase our own building, or at least begin the effort to purchase the building. And we have a space here that is sort of bigger than a black box, maybe 400 seats.
Mm-hmm.
We can do these sort of chamber operas and promote our residents, our 6 resident artists. And this is where we kind of get a diversity of our repertoire. The thing I have loved about Pittsburgh is we have these we can still do the bigger operas that are more popular, that will often, you can sell 2,600 seats to a Carmen because people know it, it's a big enough city, but you wouldn't sell that many to something like As One.
Mm-hmm.
And you wouldn't want to do it in that kind of space because it's 2 people playing one character. You would do that in a smaller space. And that is a modern American composer, female composer, something that when I was in school, it's not that we didn't value, we didn't have the same level of exposure for whatever historical reasons. We don't need to go into that necessarily, but I see it now in our profession that we're embracing the sort of newness. So you have this tradition, this traditional side, or these grand things, which sometimes the new opera is the grand opera. Mm-hmm. And we also have these chamber pieces, which can tell completely different stories, but yet use this medium. And those are done more in our buildings. We have this variety of spaces, all of which the resident artists usually do 2 of the 6 productions here, exclusively them. And then in the bigger ones, they are covering the big roles and doing maybe smaller roles. Mm-hmm. So in Carmen, the ladies who we have here will do the gypsies, but not Carmen herself.
So you would hire somebody with a big name to come and be the Carmen.
Exactly. We will have sort of somebody that's more international. So then you get the exposure and the residents build connections with the sort of bigger name artists who come to Pittsburgh, but yet they are also giving their chance on the stage and they're, with their resume. Now, Santa Fe, part of the reason I love going there is because it feels much bigger and much bigger in scope in terms of the productions that they put on. 4 this year because of the pandemic, but 5 in general. But the casts themselves are much more national and international in scope. And from that basis, the residents who go there are also hired, and often, because of Santa Fe being at high altitude and because the season is quite long, they're hired to cover and often go on stage. I've had a few people who are close friends of mine begin their careers by going on stage as a cover in the Santa Fe Opera. And then that exposure, because it's during the summer and most people don't have as many summer programs, you will get a week or so when almost the entire opera world from all over the world is there. And we, at that exact point, when the whole opera world is there in Santa Fe, not whole opera world, I'm being exaggerating a little bit, but they give an audition for the resident artists. And I've actually had to play that. And I have to say, it's crazy because all of my past, present, and maybe future employers are in the audience.
Yes.
So it's a great thing. And they're there on vacation. But that exposure, like we said, and those connections are priceless because you never know what moment one of those people in the audience will suddenly need.
And how many productions do you guys usually do in Santa Fe?
In Santa Fe, they do 5 productions usually, and they do, by August, they are running them all in repertoire. So you could come for a week and you can see 5 different operas in this incredibly unique outdoor venue.
Yes.
Indoor, but outdoor. If you've ever seen pictures of it, it looks like either a spaceship or a ship because it looks like it has sails. But you can see the sunset from the back of the stage, and you just can't replace, or you can't recreate something like that on a stage. It's absolutely stunning.
Yeah, I would like to show you a video that you are playing, and I think it is the first. It's a competition, am I correct?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and let's see. I already asked Andrea to prepare, and let's see if we can listen to that, and you specify the time for us as well.
I did.
Yeah, let's see if we can hear that. And can you comment a little bit about that? You mentioned.
Sure. So, like, part of the beauty and curse of being a pianist is that you are playing often and you're performing often, which is wonderful. The curse is sometimes you don't even know what's coming next. In this specific excerpt, the judges, she presented 5 pieces and the judges chose the second piece. I didn't even know this was on YouTube until somewhat recently. But I thought that we actually did very well. And even considering neither of us knew we were specifically going to perform this, I thought it would be fun to just present this.
And so tell us more about the Mildred Miller International Voice Competition, and where is that?
The Mildred Miller International Voice Competition is based here in Pittsburgh. It is sort of a spin-off of like what the Metropolitan Opera or some other companies have done. And Pittsburgh wanted a competition that kind of emulated those bigger competitions to begin promoting talent from all across the nation. And Melinda and I have actually not crossed paths since, but I've seen her singing almost everywhere now since then. So I'm sure that we'll cross paths eventually, hopefully here in Pittsburgh or in Santa Fe. And I thought this was a cute excerpt, and it seemed short. So that's
what is she going to sing? Do you know?
She is going to sing Qu'il bel sogno from La Rondine Puccini. And yeah, it was the 3rd song she was selected. And I think she won or was second place, maybe second place.
Okay. Well, let's hear.
Yeah. I'm finding the music.
Bravo. That's beautiful.
But I like this excerpt because it's one of those things where we had never performed it. And you could tell, so I'm sure as a musician, because you'll hear one part where she goes up for the thing, and I chose a little faster tempo than she chose. But then the third beat, it was fine.
Yes.
Because we didn't have any preparation. We just literally went there in front of an audience, and I knew the piece well. She knows the piece well. But like you said, it's different every time. And the chemistry between the two people, I really actually enjoyed playing for her. And I've spoken to her on several occasions. I'm sure we'll find a way to work together again.
Yeah, it's one of those things that sometimes you start in one tempo and the soloist is in another, and you find the middle point without even talking to each other.
Oh, yeah, 100%. And it's not, the truth was, neither tempo is wrong.
Yes.
That's the beauty of it, because you begin to explore. And, it's her competition. So I want to choose her tempo. So when I hit the second beat, I thought, oh, she's not coming yet. We will find what she wants. And then she showed me what she wanted without even doing it. So that's part of the reason I love that excerpt. Plus, I think it's really sort of an honest, natural, beautiful piece. I think
yeah. Well, what is the advice? Unfortunately, we need to finish. But what is your advice for a young musician or a young pianist? Because this is one thing that I find while I'm teaching. Yeah. I have students that walk in my office and said, I'm going to be a soloist. And some walk and say, I want to be a collaborative pianist. Okay. Yeah. Or some will say, I hate teaching. And then at the end, they are in pedagogy, and they are being a teacher. So what is your advice? Yeah. Not only, I don't want you to give an advice for a musician. I want you to give an advice for a young pianist that doesn't know yet what the piano will lead him or her. Yeah. And as you said, all of a sudden I am now an opera coach. So
yeah, I think to me, the biggest sort of bit of information or advice I would say is kind of find out who you are and go with that. Find out what makes you unique or what gives you the most joy, and do that with purpose and do that with love. The second part of that, and this is kind of like finding out who you are, sometimes also involves what outsiders perceive you as. I think it's very important to know that, whether you agree with it or not, since you want to ultimately make money or make a profession at it, you're going to need somebody to buy in or to believe in you. So when you find out what others think are unique about you, that's a great way to sort of add, or something that we don't necessarily think about. To me, in line with that, as a young pianist, the thing that made all the difference were finding great mentors, finding what I call my dream team. People that I can trust with right away, people like you during the pandemic who could say, oh, you have spinach on your teeth here, we need to work on this, without going in front of the public and finding out you need to work on it. You don't want to read in a review the bad news. You want somebody who can lift you up and be constructive and still productive on that. I think the mentorship, finding those mentors, finding the people that you feel have your best interests at heart, and then taking their advice. Taking their advice is silly, but kind of using that in consideration with what you feel, because ultimately it's your decision. You have to be the CEO, and you take all the risk and benefit and therefore reward. I would also be careful as a young person of something I call miswanting. I say this it is a silly thing, but where you feel like maybe you want to be the solo pianist, but you don't realize that in order to be the solo concerto pianist, that you are actually living a very solitary lifestyle, because you are at the piano alone, building, crafting, and then in rehearsal very few amount of times interacting with people, even when you're at the best of your career. And it could be miswanting on the other end. You could find out, you could always feel like you have a sort of block toward teaching, but then suddenly you realize as a coach, you're really being a mentor and ally, because singers can't hear themselves per se. So
Yeah.
you're being their ears, sort of. So yeah, I would say just be careful that you're not miswanting and that you're able to not only dream big, find out who you are, nurture those curiosities, but also have the wisdom to sort of listen to those people that are also giving you feedback on what you're putting out there.
And I think I can add this because I've known you for what, 20 years? 20?
Yeah.
20? Can you believe that? 20 years?
I know. We had a very tragic day, but you were one of the most beautiful things that came out of September 11th for me.
Yeah, because I moved to Mississippi State the weekend before September 11th. That's correct.
But I am very dearly grateful for you. And I'd always think of that part, at least, of that year with such beautiful affection, actually.
It was a tough day. It was a tough semester for me because I was moving back from Brazil back to United States. And yeah, it was the weekend before September 11, and then the world went upside down, at least here in the United States. But one thing that always brought my attention to you, Jim, is that you always wanted to learn. You were humble enough that you always wanted to learn. When you came and asked for me to listen to you this past summer, I was like, what? No, you don't need this. Come on. But I think one of the things that catches attention to the good musicians is the idea that I can always learn. And from whoever, from the mentor, from somebody, from a colleague, or even students. We learn from students as well.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. You know you are my dear.
Thank you. I so much enjoyed this. I enjoyed this very much.
Yes, thank you. Stay with us. We're going to get out of the screen, but thank you very much for all that have listened to this interview. And obrigado a todos por ouvirem essa entrevista com o correpetidor da Ópera de Pittsburgh e Santa Fé, James Leniask, que também foi um grande colega meu aqui na Mississippi State Universirity. Ele era o nosso colaborador e correpetidor. E agradeço a todos que ouviram e também a oportunidade de fazer essa entrevista. Agradeço a Andréia Luiza Teixeira. Até mais.
James, what a pleasure to be with you. Thank you very much. Thank you for sharing with us your life, your music, your brilliant art. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was absolutely my pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you, Rose. Beautiful interview. Thank you. Muito obrigada a todos vocês pela presença. Esse é um programa da Escola de Música e Artes Cênicas da Reitoria Digital da Universidade Federal de Goiás e Mississippi State University, com apoio da Fundação para a Ciência e Tecnologia de Portugal, Centro de Estudos de Sociologia e Estética Musical da Universidade Nova de Lisboa, do Centro de Estudos Brasileiros, da Rádio Universitária e da Rádio Brasil Central FM. Fazem parte desse projeto, além de mim, da equipe, Maria Caroline Porto, Pablo Lisboa, Rosângela Yasbeck Seba, Sérgio de Paiva e Wesley de Menezes. Muito obrigada a todos vocês pela audiência. The Piano and its Perspectives, it's a program of the School of Music and Performing Arts, Digital Department of the Federal University of Goiás and the Mississippi State University, with support from the Foundation for Science and Technology of Portugal, Center for Studies and Sociology and Musical Aesthetics of the New University of Lisbon, Center for Brazilian Studies, Radio Universitária, and Radio Brasil Central FM. Besides me, Maria Caroline Porto, Pablo Lisboa, Rosângela Yasbeck Seba, Sérgio de Paiva, and Wesley de Menezes are part of the program's team. Thank you very much.